Hi guys, my name is Trevor Sullivan. In this video, I wanted to take a few moments to talk to you about how to debug a PowerShell module inside of Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Now, this video was actually requested by one of my viewers, so please feel free to leave any comments on any of my videos or on my channel somewhere with any recommendations about different videos that you would like to see or different topics that you'd like to see me talk about on my channel. All right, so in front of me here, I am on my macOS system, and I have Visual Studio Code installed. Now, if I hit Command B and then do Command Shift X, that'll switch me over to the extensions pane. And what you'll notice is that I have the PowerShell extension installed here, which is very well supported by Microsoft. And I also have PowerShell Core Edition installed on my Mac as well. So to test to make sure that PowerShell is up and running, what I'll do is just go ahead and hit Command B to close that. I'll do Command N to create a new file, and then do Command KM and set the language mode in this file to PowerShell. Now I'll also hit Command tilde, and that will bring up my terminal down here at the bottom. So because it's not responding, I'm just going to do a Command Shift P and do PowerShell restart current session. And as you can see, that gets it back up and running to where it should be. So what we're going to do now is author a very basic PowerShell script module. We're not going to talk about compiled modules that are written in C# today. That's just outside the scope of this particular video. But I did want to start out by just building a very basic script module. So the module itself will be created in PowerShell code. We'll save that as a separate module file. And then we will use the PowerShell Pester module, which is actually a unit testing module for PowerShell that allows us to write automated tests against our module. And by writing automated tests, you can help increase the robustness of your code and make sure that as you're changing things and refactoring your module, that you are not breaking existing functionality in the past. So we're going to build that module, we're going to create a unit test, and then we're going to use that unit test and show how to actually invoke the debugger from the unit test. So let's go ahead and jump into our code here. And the first thing we're going to do is start by authoring the module. So what I'll do is I'll create a couple of PowerShell classes. And as you may know from my other video content, PowerShell classes are basically just a way for you to create a blueprint of an object. So you may have a car, a person, a house, a motorcycle, something like that, and you just want to represent it with different properties and interact with that object using methods or basically functions that you define at that class level. So let's start by defining a car. So a car might have a string that's called manufacturer, and it might have a second one called model. We don't need to get too crazy here because the specific properties and methods that are on our classes are kind of irrelevant to this particular video. So let's go ahead and just use the Alt-Shift down arrow to paste that, or to basically copy those first 4 lines and duplicate it, and then we will change this to a person class, and we'll do a first name and last name property on the person class. Okay, so now we have 2 different object blueprints created. Now what I'm going to do is just create a very simple function called getSomething. And what this command is going to do, or what this function is going to do, is have 2 different parameters, and depending on which parameter you specify, it'll either return a car object or a person object. So what we need to do is specify a couple of switch parameters, and a switch parameter is kind of like a Boolean parameter, but you don't actually have to specify a value of true or false like you do with a Boolean. A switch parameter in PowerShell is either present or not present. So we'll take a look at how that works in just a moment here. So we'll add a switch parameter that says car. So we'll invoke the function with a car parameter, and that'll emit a car. Or we'll have a switch parameter called person, and that will emit a person object. So now what I need to do is I need to make sure that the function can't be called with both parameters, right? I only want it to be called with either car or person. However, the way that it's written right now will actually allow someone to call the getSomething function with both the car and the person switch parameters together. So PowerShell provides a facility that allows you to break apart parameters and kind of group them into logical sets, and they're very logically called parameter sets. So the way that we define a parameter set on a parameter, a function parameter, is to use the parameter attribute in the square brackets, and then we can specify a parameter set name. And so we'll say this is the car parameter set name. So if I specify the switch parameter of car, then the function is going to interpret that as being called, as the entire function being called with this set of parameters. Now each set of parameters, each parameter set that we're defining here is only going to have one parameter in it, but just keep in mind for the future, if you're designing other functions, that you can actually group them together and have 2, 3, 4, as many parameters as you want inside of each parameter set. So I'm just going to use the little Option Shift down arrow or Alt Shift down arrow if you're on PC, again to copy that parameter attribute down. And then we'll create a second parameter set called person. So now if I call get something dash person with that switch parameter, then we will get the command will be invoked with the parameter set name of person. And we'll take a look at actually how to consume this in just a moment here when we implement the function body, which is next. So inside the function body, we just need a simple statement that says if. I could also use a switch statement, but I'm just going to use a simple if statement here. And so I'll say if psCommandlet, so psCommandlet is an automatic variable in PowerShell inside of your function body, as long as you have an advanced function that's denoted by the commandlet binding attribute here with the parameter statement. As long as you have a function with that definition, you get this psCommandlet variable that has a bunch of very useful metadata about your function's execution environment when it's called. So what I can do is say if $psCommandlet.parameter set name equals car, then do something here. Else, if psCommandlet.parameter set name equals person, then do this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to intentionally break the function. Okay, so what we're going to do here is say if the parameter set name is car, I'm actually going to return a person, right? And that's not the functionality we want, but to demonstrate how the debugging works inside of VS Code here, we're going to just intentionally break it for now. So we'll do person new. And we didn't specify any custom constructors inside of our classes. So when we call the new static method, it's going to instantiate the object, but none of our properties are actually going to be set. So the manufacturer model on a car or on a person object, the first name and last name properties, those are actually going to be empty because they're not being set in the constructor, and we're not going to add extra lines of code just for the sake of setting them. So just keep that in mind. Typically, if you were actually implementing a useful class, then you would want to either define a constructor or manually set those properties in additional lines of code, but that's not what we're going to do here. So if the parameter set name here is going to be person, then we are going to incorrectly return a car object. And if you want to be a little bit more explicit about that, you can also use the return statement. So only one of these will get called, either return person or return car, and it'll be incorrect for each of these. But we're going to write tests that actually catch that error, and then we'll use those tests to actually step into our function code and actually see what's happening in the debugger, and then we'll be able to use that debugger feedback to help us fix the function and get it back into a working state where the tests are passing. Okay, so I've created this little module here where I've defined two classes and I've defined a single function. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and save this as a module file, which is just a PowerShell script file with a .psm1 file extension, not a ps1 extension like a script would have. So what I'll do is I'll call this I don't want to use any conflicting names here. So I'll call this cars2.psm1. So my module name is basically going to be cars2. All right, so now I've created this module, and as you can see, it changed to a pink icon here because it's actually a module now instead of a script. So what I'm going to do is double click up here in the bar, or I can do Command N to create another file. I'll do Command K and then M, set my language mode to PowerShell, and it changed to blue, indicating that it's a PowerShell script file now. So what I need to do, first of all, is I need to import my module. So to do that, I'll do import module -name, and then the file system path to my module file, the PSM1 file. So I'll do $home/cars2.psm1. And if I do function F5 to run that, you'll see my module is imported successfully, and I can just verify that here interactively in the terminal by running the get module, or the GMO alias, which is the built-in alias for get module. And you'll see that I have this cars2 module imported into my session. And the cars2 module exports a single function called getSomething. So now I need to start writing my Pester tests. And even though you don't see Pester in the list of modules here, that's only because I haven't imported it into my PowerShell environment yet. If you want to check if a module is installed but not imported, you can always do get module list available. And then optionally, you can specify the name of the specific module that you're looking for. So I can see that I do actually have Pester installed. It just hasn't been imported yet because I haven't called any of the functions that are exported by that module. And that's a feature called module auto-loading in PowerShell, which is enabled by default. If PowerShell module auto-loading was not enabled, I would either need to put a comma here and say also import Pester, or I could just duplicate this line down and be a little bit more verbose and say, okay, I'm importing cars2, plus I'm also going to import Pester. But because of PowerShell module auto-loading, I don't have to worry about manually importing Pester because it's in my PS module search path. Whereas the reason I have to explicitly import my cars module is because my home directory is not in the PS module path search directory. So in Pester, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but Pester has a top-level command called describe. So basically, it's just a mechanism to kind of group your different unit tests together. So I'll say describe cars2. So basically, describe all the unit tests that pertain to my cars2 module. And then inside here, you can optionally put a context block that allows you to further provide subgroups of your different individual unit tests. I'm going to skip over that for the sake of brevity, and instead I'm just going to create an it statement. So an it statement is a unit test. And so what I'll say is it should return a car. And inside of my block here, what I'm going to do is say get something -car should return a car object, right? And the way that we determine what type of object it is we call the getType method. So this is a .NET concept. Any .NET object should have a getType method on it. I think it's defined at the system.object kind of root class that every object really inherits from. But what we want to do is basically take the output of the getSomething function, and whatever object it is that function call returns, we want to call getType on that object. And when we get the output of that getType method call, we should have, so we should say should be, so the output of that should be a car. So let's go ahead and do function F5 and run this. Now what you'll see down here in the terminal, let me just move this up a little bit, is that it's running my test here. So it says run the describe block, which is cars2. And then inside there's only a single unit test, and it took 92 milliseconds to run. And it says it should return a car, right? So what does it say right below that? So it ran this unit test that I wrote, and it said it expected a car because I said should be car. So that's what the unit test was expecting it to be. However, it actually got a person, right? So that unit test is failing. So we need to add a second test because we have two different use cases for this function that we want to test. So get something, or sorry, it should return a person here. Let me just fix the capitalization. So get something -person.getType should be a person, right? So let's do function F5 to run that. And now we have 2 unit tests that both failed, right? So expected car got person, expected person, but got car. And we intentionally caused that breakage, if you recall, when we implemented our function earlier. So now we need to debug the function that we wrote, the getSomething function that we wrote, because clearly the getSomething function is returning output that we're not expecting it to in 2 different use cases, right? All right, so what we need to do first is set a breakpoint on the lines that are failing. So what I can do here is do function F9, or if you're on a PC keyboard, just F9. I'm on a Mac keyboard here. And what you'll see is that there's a breakpoint here on the left-hand side. And what we can do is if we do function F5 to run this script from top to bottom, actually, sorry, I need to set my breakpoint inside my module, not inside of my script file. So what I need to do is come over to the getSomething function, and I'm going to specify a breakpoint on the first line of the function body. So I'll do function F9 on line number 20 here, so that as soon as it hits this first if statement, it'll break execution. All right, so let's go back to our unit test file, and we will run that. So we executed our unit test file with F5, and as you can see, because we have this cars2 module imported into our PowerShell environment, it actually broke execution here on line number 20. And so if we do Command-Shift-D, typically for these presentations, I minimize the sidebar with Command-B. That just allows you to toggle the sidebar on and off, but it keeps it kind of nice and clean not to have it there. But if you do Command-Shift-D, it'll switch you over to the debugger context inside of Visual Studio Code. And as you can see here, you actually have these variables that have been populated by the runtime, by the PowerShell runtime from this unit test script that I started. So what's happened here is we've called the getSomething function. And if we drill into our local variables here, here's this PS commandlet variable, this automatic variable that I told you about before that has that parameter set name property on it. And if we keep scrolling down here a little bit, you'll see that the PS commandlet variable has a child property called parameter set name. And that in the current execution environment, because we're broken into the debugger, the current value of it is car, because the first unit test that ran was calling getSomething with the car switch parameter, which is mapped to a parameter set name. So when we specify that switch parameter, it's calling the function with the car parameter set name, right? So on our second unit test, when it loops back through and runs our second unit test, this parameter set name is actually going to be person instead. So because we can visually inspect and we can see in front of us here that the parameter set name is equal to car, we're fairly confident that the next line it executes will actually be line 21. So let's verify that by saying step over, or F10 if you prefer to use the keyboard shortcuts for it. And sure enough, it jumped over to line 21. So this function is ultimately going to invoke this return statement and return a person object here. So immediately I can see that even though the parameter set name was car, what's actually being returned by this function is this person object. So that's wrong, right? So let's go ahead and cancel execution here because we've identified what the problem is. So we need this car parameter set name to return a car. So we'll save that and come back to our unit test file. So let's go ahead and rerun this and see what happens. So I'll hit Command-B to close my little sidebar again. So I'm going to hit function F5, rerun the script. And we broke again on line number 20 because that's where we expected it to break. And let's take a look at parameter set name. So PS commandlet, if I hover over it, you'll see I have parameter set name as car. Perfect. That's what we expect from the first unit test. And then we'll do F10 and F10 again to step out of the function. And now it's going to actually break into the Pester module, but we don't need to debug the Pester module. So what we're going to do is actually just continue execution through to the end by hitting F5 or the continue function. And so now it's going to run our second unit test. So we got the output from our first unit test, which actually failed. Wait, why? Why did that fail? Why did our first unit test fail if we fixed the code? So when we call get something with car, it should be a car. But in my module file, I fixed the code from person to car, so it should be passing now, right? Well, let's do F5 and just finish our unit tests. Now both are still failing, but our first unit test we fixed. So what's going on here? Well, because even though we made a change to our module file, and even though we have this import module statement at the top of our script, our unit test script, it isn't actually re-importing the module. What's happening is it's saying, oh, the module is already imported. I'm not going to re-import it. And it's going to basically not silently fail, but it's going to silently proceed, right? So what you actually have to do in PowerShell is use the -force parameter that we just added here on line number 1 for your import module statement, and that will force PowerShell to actually reprocess your module file and re-import it into the environment. So now that we've added the force parameter, let's go ahead and hit F5, and we're going to break on our first unit test again. So let's do F10, 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 and let's actually just do function F5. It's going to break again because it's running our second unit test now. And now check this out. Our first unit test actually passed, right? And yeah, the execution time was 10 seconds because we were sitting in the debugger for quite a while there as we were talking through things. But as you can see, our first unit test passes, and now our second unit test is broken. So all we have to do is do the same thing. So we'll rerun our unit test script. We'll hit function F5 to pass the first unit test, and then we'll break again on line 20 here in our module when the second unit test runs. So now if I hover over the parameter set name, it's equal to person on the second unit test because we specified the person switch parameter, which maps to a parameter set name named person. So it's not going to equal car, so it's going to skip over line 20, skip over line 21 and 22, and then it's going to jump to line 23 to run our else if statement. So there we go. If we hit F10 or function F10 on my Mac keyboard to do the step over function with the debugger, it's going to jump to line 23, and sure enough, parameter set name does equal person, so we're rather confident that it'll jump to line 24. So it's returning a car, and as we discussed earlier, it's supposed to be returning a person. So let's go ahead and fix that one really quickly, because you get the idea, I think, right? So we want that parameter set name to return a person. Let's switch back to our, so now that we're confident we've fixed that, let's actually remove our breakpoint because we don't need it anymore. We've used it for its purpose. So let's switch back to our unit test, do function F5, and sure enough, our tests are now passing. So there you go. So that's an overview of how to use the debugger in Microsoft Visual Studio Code to debug a PowerShell script module. And it also kind of demonstrates how to use some of the basics of Pester unit testing. There's a guy named Jacob over in Europe who has done a very good job of building Pester over the years. So huge shout out to him for all the work you've done on Pester. Thank you very much for that unit testing module. It's great that it's a core part of PowerShell now. All right, that about sums up this video. Please leave a like if you liked this video. Please leave a comment down below if you'd like to share any additional feedback about my videos. And please hit the subscribe button. It really helps encourage me to produce more content for you guys. And please keep coming back to the channel to consume more of my videos. I make it for you guys, so please let me know what you like. Thank you. Cheers.